You look great, James.
Hey, Joe, thanks.
This is a perfect outfit for your big show.
Where'd you find that shirt? I think we got the same one.
No, this is a casual flannelly kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Now, let me know if you hear lots of extraneous noise from me today, because as you've heard, I've sold my home. And today is the day that we do $3,500 worth of maintenance to the roof that I did not know we needed.
Nice. So you'll just
Now,
stay on mute then.
please don't be confused with the $5,000 worth of work that we need to do in the crawl space that I've never seen.
But you got an offer you couldn't refuse, though, right?
It's true. And my children, who are upstairs dealing with the bang, bang, bang of the roof, are like, Dad, what's... I said, that's $3,500 worth of work, so shut up. That's what we're going to be listening to today.
Yeah. If you hear barking, that's me, but
I'm sorry, is that...
not me.
Oh.
From my end, yeah.
Now, where's our friend Verna? I don't see her name on our little list here yet.
I don't see her yet either. I was just talking to her before this, so she should be in soon. Oh, there she is.
Hey,
There's
Just like
Verna Manty Rodriguez.
how are you?
Your hair is a different color than I remember.
It is. I just decided to bleach it out like white gray.
But you misrepresent yourself online with all that brunetteness.
I know. Well, I actually, as a child, I was blonde, and then my hair's gotten more like with gray mixed in with kind of a ashy, kind of brownish. I thought, oh, what the heck? Like, let's just like
It's
completely.
beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, we're taking comments now from people online about whether they like Verna's hair this shade.
Okay.
Now, typically I put everyone on, but you guys get so little time online with me that few people really know you. So I'm gonna steel myself, except for a few little exceptions, like Shannon Clark. Where have you been? And let's see, Larry Lugo. I'm gonna let him say hello. And okay, Andre, you got me. I want to see what's on the wall. Michelle Lott says your hair is beautiful.
Oh, Michelle, we're just becoming great buddies, Michelle and I, because we just started
Nothing?
working on a couple projects together.
What a disappointment you've turned out to be.
I've got to keep you guessing, Joe. I got to keep you.
You can guess in the dark, pal. Jord loves the hair.
Great. All right.
And we have a few people who say it's ugly and get her clean. And
That's
who
okay.
is that?
I can change it like in a heartbeat. I can completely like
We can
chop
just
it off,
put
put extensions on.
Instead.
You know how we are as women. We just have all kinds of tools to change our appearance.
Let's see. Let's just say hello to some friends here who I've just asked to. Shannon Clark.
Good morning.
Every 3 months, you and I should do this.
I've
Where have you been?
actually been sick,
Oh, no.
but I'm doing better. I
The
didn't
C
get
word?
COVID though. No worries.
Did you get the COVIDs?
I didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't pry, but your MDG family has been wondering about you.
Thank you.
Now we wonder about Larry Lugo, if he's going to be able to figure out how to put on his camera.
Yes. Or is he just going to remain in the dark? No
Well,
pun
he's figure out
intended.
his sound. And I have seen him before, so I know he exists. He's in California as well. Do you know one
Okay.
another?
No. Larry, are you in the Bay Area?
He cannot be heard,
Oh,
but
he can't
I'll
hear.
interpret what he's trying to say as he's in Alameda. Is that right?
Oh,
You're correctly pushing the on-off microphone button, but you have got technical difficulties, Larry. Aren't you the one that I had to end up calling by cell phone and we had to look at one another? He's older than he looks. Hey, everybody, that's what Larry looks like. Smile at the nice people,
hi,
Larry.
Larry.
Okay. Good to see you, Shannon. Call me later, okay? Okay. We'll start our day. And we're gonna back to putting you in the. Now you find people, James, I think you know you have your microphone off. Now it is on.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that yours is just technical enough that you have slides today.
Yes, actually we do. We have done this, we actually did the same talk yesterday with X Talks, but we knew that this would be much more casual and hopefully interactive with folks. So if people want to dig into certain slides, and we'll probably go a little bit quicker over some other slides because this is a very specifically high level med tech expertise already that we're talking to. So we'll probably want to talk a little bit more deeply just about product requirements, like techie stuff.
Okay. I'm gonna, let's see, where is, the one person I'm looking for who's not yet joined us is Jan Gates. Do you know her?
Oh, yes, Jan used to work for me years ago.
For you?
Yes, yeah, I had the packaging engineering group at a little division of Guidant, and she was one of the key packaging gurus that I think it was my first promotion to a director level in manufacturing engineering. So I had manufacturing engineering, packaging engineering, floor support, machine shop. So yes, Jan's like awesome.
Jan is like awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote,
She really is
like,
awesome.
oh my God, look at what tomorrow's talk is. This is so relevant. I was like, why don't you put something on LinkedIn and to promote it? She's like, I don't know how to do that.
Oh.
She said, I know how to leave a comment. I had no time to make a little video about how to post something on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But we can do that another time. Now I'm interested to know how the two of you know one another, because if I'm not mistaken, James, you're also in California?
I'm not. I couldn't be further, actually.
Exactly. He couldn't be further.
Where are
Halifax, Nova Scotia, for East Coast Canada. Yeah.
We're not allowed to see you in person.
No,
Right.
I know. Or they're not allowed to see us is really the rule.
Is it though? Think about the dynamic of the world right now. Who's not allowed to see who?
We don't even know. We're confused, at least in the lower 48. We're completely confused.
Now, how did the two of you know one another?
So good story. I was just thinking about that this morning, and I was thinking, oh yeah, how do I? So for me, I was, which I still do, I teach a few classes on medical device development and specifically design control. So this one slide that I have is about writing requirements, and I forget where I found it. It might have been through Greenlight Guru, it might have been some other organization, but they mentioned the INCOSI guidelines. And I thought, okay, I've got to get a copy of these because I didn't even know there were guidelines for writing requirements appropriately. So I start Googling, digging into it. Then I find something called the EARS requirements, which I was grateful for, because the INCOSI guidelines, I was like, oh my God, this just looks like I need to get a PhD to learn how to write a product requirement. So then I found this EARS document that was posted by James' company, QRA. And so I go, oh, well, this looks like it would be livable for me to be able to teach my students. And then digging a little further, it's like, oh, there's software that makes this more automated. And I thought, well, this would be great for when I'm trying to grade my students. And so that's how it started. And then actually I'll be teaching this same class again, because that was a year ago. I'll be teaching it this coming up winter quarter. And then I told James, I said, well, I really want to have this for all of my students, because the software teaches you real time how to improve your requirements writing. So I thought, rather than them write something, turn it in, I grade it using the software, then I turn it back. I thought, I just want to have this so that my students can get immediate feedback and improve their requirements writing. And then we just started collaborating, because I was so enthusiastic about their product that James was saying, I love coming to work because you love our product. So when I really love something, I don't hold back. I'm like full on cheerleader.
I'm the same way.
Yeah. And so her and I started talking back, it'd be a year and a half ago now when we first met, and just Verna's approach to her students and like passion that she has for teaching really resonated with sort of the way that we like to help companies and help teams with their product requirements. So we've collaborated on a couple of different things now. We actually have a resource we'll mention later that Verna helped us develop, 23 must-haves for developing an effective product requirements document. So we can share that with everybody that's here if you're interested in that as well. But
I would like to share it with my audience.
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
premium, like that sounds important.
Yeah.
I don't even know what it means.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll know more by the end of our talk.
There we are.
Verna and I actually met in person. Was it just the once?
Yes, it was just the once. And then I think we met the once. It was probably
It was San Francisco.
it was actually, no, it was down in San Jose.
It was at the Raw Bar.
Yes, exactly. And I was still at Numerix at the time. I hadn't started doing my own company in this gig. And then the next time that I was kind of hoping to maybe meet up, I had just started consulting. You had the 10X going in Southern California, but like, California is like 2 states, because it's like for me to schlep down there is, 5 to 8 hours. And so I was like, well, I don't know. And I just started my business. So I was like, well, that's a chunk of change for me when I'm just getting things going. And so I didn't make it to the 10X. I thought, okay, well, maybe, the following year, which is this COVID hit. So it's like, well, I guess it'll have to be in the future sometime. So.
And we still have this today.
Yes, exactly.
So it'll have to do for now. So
yes,
my guests are chomping at the bit. Tell us, what are we going to learn today?
Yes. So we are going to talk about product requirements, and hopefully some of our technical folks are going to have some understanding and understand the heartburn that engineers go through in writing requirements and who assesses what a proper requirement is and a proper set of product requirements. And basically I'll tap into a little bit of what the FDA says about what you need to do. And then also I'll mention a couple of the standards that I just mentioned now in COSI, which stands for the, what is it? It is the International Council for Systems Engineering. And Michelle Lott actually used to sit on this council way back in the day. And so I remember I reached out to her several months ago saying like, so are you still in the, she didn't get back to me. We ended up connecting later, but that was like in a previous lifetime of hers. So you know how it is with med device and engineers, we're all in a small world. So
while you were talking, I had a few people that I've typed, you really should be on today's call.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So,
I will, and so anyways, and then
you have a lot to share. I'll be here, of course, but silently and let you do your thing. You're welcome to share your screen. Okay. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the James and Verna Show. Take it away.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay. All right. Everybody see the screen now? All right. Okay. So today's topic, the complexity threat, which is basically we're going to talk about product requirements, why we need a new approach in terms of drafting and maintaining product requirements. So we're going to jump into, first of all, kind of why focus on requirements. I'll talk a little bit about the problem and the trend. I probably won't dig into this too much because it really is fairly general. I want to kind of get to this whole solution and process, but if questions come in to Joe, then Joe, feel free to jump in and say, oh, someone has a question about this slide or whatever.
No, I will.
Okay, good. It makes it a little more casual and fun for when James and I are doing something like this. So the process standards and rules that I mentioned, I'll just comment on those again, but James will get into it a little bit more. And also with automating the process, James will be taking over from there. So why kind of focus on requirements? Well, what I'm hoping to tell you guys is that it's really, if you haven't already understood this, it's really the foundation of your product development process. And it basically is the communication tool that you use with the rest of your organization, also suppliers. And you'll see with some of the quotes that I pull out of FDA guidance documents in the CFR that it's also understood that it should be the main focus of your organization, not just your engineers, but in terms of making it kind of foundational in your company. So I hope that some of the data is going to be helpful not only for you, but if you're an engineer or a technical person that kind of understands this intuitively because you've been working in requirements, whether you're regulatory or whether you're a technician or whatever, that some of this data might be helpful for you to share with your management And even if they don't want to talk about product requirements because they're not technical, they might be marketing folks or whatever, that some of this data will help help you to show your management that high-performing companies are able to maintain their reputation, are able to have high-quality products, and that this first step is really important in achieving that. So basically, the answer is that, like I was mentioning, that these are the building blocks of your product design, and they're the starting point in your design control process. And so without a proper foundation, you're not going to be able to achieve project and product performance. And you can even be in the dark side of having a lot of regulatory and quality issues without a solid foundation of product requirements.
And I jump in here just for a second for those of you that were on the chat a couple of weeks ago that Joseph Anderson gave. We had a discussion around what is quality, and the definition that he uses for it as an expert in that is, a quality product is a product that meets the requirements. So you can imagine if your requirements are poorly written or misunderstood or incomplete, you can actually get this contradiction where you've made a quality product, but the quality product is based on misunderstandings of the requirements. So you actually end up with a product that will not be successful in the market. It might not even get approval because you were missing key requirements. So even though your design teams were able to, incorporate and meet all of those requirements, the requirements were incorrect or misunderstood. So you're going to introduce a whole bunch of new problems at that point as well,
Yeah.
which is what this slide talks about as well.
Yeah, or conflicting, like maybe you've written every single individual requirement is good, but then you've got conflicting problems. Or you get problems where you don't keep things up to date, especially folks that are using agile or a continuous discovery process. That's much more common in a large systems engineering project. And you've got so many requirements to go through that it starts to become really burdensome to try and maintain, especially if you are actually trying to appropriately use an INCOSE guideline or an EARS guideline. So kind of a little bit on the background then, these next two slides just talk about the problem. This is across not just medical device, but it's from specifically the Project Management Institute. And it really tells us that nearly 50% of failed projects cite poor requirements as the primary cause. In companies that are struggling, that are low performing companies, meaning that they're not meeting their project goals and their company goals, that up to 10% of their project costs can be traced to poor requirements. So communication is a problem, not only in terms of written, but obviously in terms of verbal in these kind of organizations, and clarity. And then more than half of all engineering errors originate in the requirements. And this has been something that's been studied over years and decades even. It's a known issue. And so, and that's from the last bullet here in terms of the reference, in terms of that data. So what I want to show you then is what happens in terms of cost to your organization. So a lot of you, I'm sure, if not all of you, understand that you start with requirements early in the project, you get to design, verification, validation, and you're in the market. This is just a simple diagram, again, with references from IBM Systems Science Institute, that across all kinds of organizations, not just med device, every later stage of development, the cost of correcting the errors increases. So if you've got poor requirements in the beginning, but you're able to manage them and correct them, great, it's not a big problem. But you get to just the design phase and already the cost is 7 times what it would be for correcting them early on. And then it just expands from there. Obviously, once you're in the market, it can probably even be 100 times or more, because especially for med device, you've got things like not only compliance issues, but you could have patient health, safety, death, all recall issues that can actually trail with you for even many, many years. So let's look specifically in the med device area, some data there. What I wanted to start with is this trend of increasing innovation in med device. A lot of you have seen this, understand it, know it well. It's really a great thing that's happening because there's clear benefits. even before COVID, we've had plenty of technological advances in medical devices, and they have clear benefits that can help healthcare organizations meet growing demand, as well as deliver better patient care. So AI, for example, can predict probability of conditions to help doctors provide diagnosis and treatment plan. We've got robotics. They're doing various healthcare tasks, everything from, and we'll see that grow. The robotics is everything from patient intake to surgical procedures. And that, just a little data point there, robotics is expected to reach $20 billion by 2023. So that's not just a couple years away here. And then we've got wearables that a lot of you are familiar with, wearables that are not only our watches that can do things like detect atrial fibrillation and then flag doctors with these issues, but also tracking things, other wearables like blood pressure monitors, and also sensors, patches that can track temperature, heart rate, etc. So with this increase in innovation, we've got a lot more software, we've got a lot more connectivity between devices. And so the product complexity increases, but that means you've just got more requirements to manage and maintain. And with that, this new technology, obviously we've seen a lot more guidance documents from the FDA. They've issued dozens of them over the past few years, and they continue to do so. And the EU MDR, as Michelle Lott says, it's coming. It's still coming. And there are a lot of products that are recategorized into higher classes of risk. And then, of course, all of these increased requirements, changing requirements mean that we've got increased regulations that affect companies' quality systems. So quality systems need to be updated and changed, and that just brings challenges, because if they're not appropriately and proactively managed and cost efficiently managed, then these can be threats to your company's success. And so that's what my next slide shows us, is that that is happening to a lot of companies. We've got medical device recalls that are continuing to increase. Obviously, a lot of it is just because the industry is growing, but I would argue that just this first data point of software as the #1 cause has been for the 16th straight quarter in a row. Okay, that's as of Q1 2020. And then quality and out of spec issues are not far behind. And so I would also argue that it is so often that product requirements are connected to or behind a lot of these issues. This costs just a single company alone up to $600 million. It costs our industry these days between $7.5 and $14 billion per year. And this is only part of the cost. Penalties and corrections are only part of it. There are issues with company reputation. Just a little story from my working days in Guidant Corporation, a little company that many of you are probably well aware of and understand. I was working at the AAA division. This is actually when I knew Jan Gates, and Jan and I worked together. I just moved over there as the director of manufacturing engineering. I was excited for this new role. It was not, I think, it was definitely not even a month, maybe a week or two. And my manufacturing engineer comes to me, the floor support guy, and he says, the line's down. And I'm thinking, this is kind of a normal issue that goes on in manufacturing. The line goes down because something's out of whack. You know, your process, something coming off the line as being an issue. We were doing just-in-time manufacturing. This is a normal thing. I said, okay, well, it's not working. Oh, well, what's your tolerance range on this process? Can't you tweak it in terms of what's been validated? Well, there wasn't a tolerance range. I go, well, let's go see what was validated. There was no process validation. I was in shock. And you might be thinking, okay, what does that mean about product requirements? Well, I had to like every few days, I would say, okay, go look for this. And then I go, oh, there's no process validation. All right, well, that's a problem. Well, then go dig deeper. I was thinking, okay, well, what where's our product spec? Okay, so after several days, I was down to that level. Where's the product spec and the production specs and how they link up? Well, there was no retrievable product specification. It was, and so then, you know, I'm freaking out in my mind. What the hell's going on? They say, oh, it's in dot control. I go to dot control, which was literally a closet, a large closet with about 40, 50 some binders stacked in the corner. And in that corner of those binders was what was filed with the FDA for this product, which was a PMA. So I literally had to assign an engineer to go and pull out, read every single binder because there was not one specific tab. I thought, oh, well, there must be a tab that says product specification. No, it was just buried in 40 different thick binders. So, you know, our product ended up getting pulled. We had to completely revalidate the line. We had, you know, 3 to 4 months of completely off the market. And these are patients, if you know about AAA, which is abdominal aortic aneurysm. If they have to have an open procedure, you get cut from basically your sternum all the way down to your pelvic bone. You get eviscerated because your aorta runs along your spine. So you have to get to your aorta, you've got to like take all of your organs out and then repair the aorta and then put all your organs back in. This is extremely difficult procedure and with a pretty high death rate compared to a lot of other procedures. So being able to do this through the femoral artery was a lot less invasive. And we had doctors that were screaming to get this product back on the market, but we had these major compliance issues. So just this one story, just let you know that, you know, not managing, even if you don't have software, but not managing a full set of product requirements, maintaining connectivity, maintaining access to them can be a major problem, not only in terms of your product getting off the market, but we only got 50% of the market back, even when we got back on, because the whole message here in terms of reputation, not only our reputation, but the whole physician community felt like, oh, maybe this isn't a technology that's ready for prime time. We only got 50% of our market back, and competitors were not doing much better because they'd had some issues as well. So I know we can't avoid recalls altogether, but I propose a greater focus on design control and product requirements for this talk in particular to help reduce recalls as the technology and complexity of devices increases. So this is one of my favorite slides here to just remind you that coming from the FDA design control guidance, which was written decades ago, okay? So the FDA already knew then that the development of a solid foundation of requirements is, and this is like I'm not even rewriting this, it's the single most important design control activity. Okay, so you need to share that with your management if they don't get it. Indeed, what they go on to state, if you pull up the guidance document, which fortunately you don't have to pay for, you can just pull it up and read it, that the rework and redesign are significantly reduced and product quality is improved in those companies where time and resources are applied to creating a comprehensive set of requirements. And you'll see in a later slide here that they indeed have found that well-performing companies should expect and do expect to spend about 30% of their project time focused on appropriate requirements. So those companies understand the advantages that they can gain in the long run. And so basically, what's the solution? Well, well-performing companies use a formal standardized process to ensure product requirements validation on projects. They also value the requirements management at all levels of their organization. So again, this is from Project Management Institute, feedback in terms of high-performing companies, not just med device, but across all industries. And they provide, these companies provide resources, not only the people, but also tools to do requirements management, because it's so foundational for their company's product launches, quality, and of course, if I haven't made it more clear, reputation. So hopefully you can be able to help this slide to basically help put things in a helpful context for your management. So going on, then what exactly is a solid foundation of requirements? How do we build one? Where do we start? Maybe you, a lot of you probably already have some set of requirements. So how do you assess what's solid and adequate? So let me start with kind of the when and the how. So we
Hold on for a
know,
moment, just because I
Yeah.
appreciate what you're saying, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering, just from the tone of it, do you think there are companies who don't get how important these things are? I mean, when you say
Yes.
that this is like the most important FDA slide and impress upon your management, and I'm thinking, this is the foundation before you build anything. So,
Right.
you know, this isn't my discipline, but it seems obvious to me. Is it lost on others?
I think what happens is that they go, okay, we write our requirements, and like, what's the big deal? And aren't these adequate? Of course, we got engineers writing them, and it's not a big deal. But what happens is requirements change over the course of a project, and especially with these really complex devices. You can have, I mean, James, you can jump in here, but because you've seen a lot of different companies that utilize your product, but you've got like not even say like 10, 20, or maybe even, 50 to 100 line items. It's like, okay, that gets hard. But I mean, thousands of line items that you have to try to say, okay, is this clearly stated? Is it consistently stated? Are they not conflicting with one another? And you need help to be able to, and time to be able to manage those correctly.
Yeah, and something that I see often is that the need to develop the requirements, they need to be included in those binders, or in your doc control, wherever you store them, to say, we've written our requirements and we've signed off on them at these different levels. But the way to write a requirement that's clearly understood down the line is basically being just learned by experience. So you end up with your most experienced people on the team spending untold hours going through these documents to say, oh, this is too vague, this is not testable, this will be too difficult to manage. But the way that it gets communicated to groups, even in the largest medical device companies, is, they try to do training sessions, or, they create documentation that puts out, and just getting everybody on board with, why is this important? And I need to get this project out the door, so I'm not going to spend more time trying to learn about how to do this right. But it ends up coming back, time after time, a requirement is misunderstood or a requirement is missing, and then you end up having to go back and redo a lot of that work that's already been done.
I put yours on because you got a little feisty with me. I don't often get comments like this. Are you kidding, Joe? Tell them what you said.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
York must be an engineer. I want to hear from York, the engineer.
I would say good requirements document is probably something I may never have seen. I'm not sure, but it's incredible how how few good requirements documents even exist. I mean, we do projects for large companies and also for many small companies. Some of the smaller companies, you can kind of understand a little bit why they wouldn't have a good requirements document, but it's not easy writing a good requirements document. Having your requirements really only, a requirement, one feature is testable, not 2 or 3 different requirements combined in one sentence, and things like that. It's not as simple as it sounds. And and of course it makes it very difficult for us when we're trying to quote how long an engineering project is going to take if you don't have a good requirements document. So that's one of the reasons we have such high risk in our business, and why we only do time and materials, because if we had a great requirements document, it would be much easier to say, okay, that's going to take this long, it's going to cost so much. But you never really get that.
Yes, thank you,
And
York.
I wonder, Verna, when you teach, how do you go about teaching how? I mean, I can understand you could say, here are the sections. I need you to write each sentence clearly, and I need you to, here's the electrical part, and I can kind of perceive that as a framework. How do you apply that on a case-by-case basis? And Michelle writes, good requirements come from user needs.
Yes, exactly. So matter of fact, let's jump into that a little bit, because I kind of go through step by step. But specifically, really, in terms of starting from user needs is number one. User needs can also be misunderstood or mistranslated so often into what your design requirements are. And I'm going to sort of step through that a little bit. But what's difficult is that engineers are not English majors. Okay, so that's number one. is that a lot of people go into engineering, I mean, that do great in communication, but they're really more like builders, problem solvers. They think very visually. And so what I noticed in teaching is that when I say, oh, be concise, make sure it's measurable. I'm thinking this is so foundational
measurable.
and easy, right? It has to have something measurable. And yet I constantly get with people learning and using the QV Scribe tool, they're still using words that are vague. There's no measure. It's like, oh, it should be as big as possible, or there's nothing that or maybe the words are not even vague, but it's like, there's nothing to measure here. And so even when I go and write them with the team, I'm trying to, right now in the middle of writing some user requirements, translating them into design requirements. And, you have to think very clearly about like, okay, what does this word mean? And then how is that going to translate to something that is measurable in terms of a design requirement? It's not a small or easy task, but it can be if you are at least following some standard guidelines. And for me, I was like, gosh, I've been in engineering specifically in med device for like over 30 years. How come I've never heard of the NCOSI guidelines? I feel like I'm an idiot. But once I found them and started reading them, I was like, okay, I guess if I was a systems engineer in aerospace or something, then probably they have a system for utilizing this and training people. But I thought like, it's a very thick document. It's 40 some requirements. So to try and like do that in your human, in one person's head, and then across an engineering team, it's just daunting. And so that's kind of how I ended up getting into this and trying to make it more straightforward.
And what you end up with too, with especially large organizations, but even somebody trying to apply these principles for themselves, you get something like the FDA guidelines, which are, they're need to be clear and concise and consistent. So, okay, I'm going to try to do those three things. Well, if you tell a team of 10,000 engineers that they need to make their requirements, those three things, clear, concise, and consistent, then you're going to have all sorts of different interpretations of what that means. And so with so few rules, you end up with really no guidance. It's like pretty much everybody for themselves to figure it out. And then you can go beyond that to something like the NCOSI guide with 40 rules in it. And then it goes too far the other way, where now it's very clear what you're supposed to do, but remembering all of those rules, applying those rules consistently becomes overwhelming. So the biggest number I've seen is one organization has over 500 checks that they do on every technical document that they write in terms of how it's formatted and how it's written and what language is included. So they manually check for this. And even with the number of 40, you try to teach that to a large team and it becomes overwhelming. So that's where our tool, which we'll get into in a little bit, comes in, where it's actually just teaching you as you write, showing you things that could be in violation of those rules, making sure your requirement is clear and concise with the language that you've used in it. But yeah, I'll hand it back to Verna there to continue.
Yeah, let me step through.
What you've just kind of talked about is why I love the call so much, because James and I have talked a couple times and I kind of knew what he did, and just the context of hearing you guys talk while you were talking, I was like, let me check out his site again, and the little video works, and I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
You sell a piece of software that helps me write requirements,
right?
And
that follows the guidelines in terms of what is a vague word, what is what's a concise statement, does it it'll search for, do you have something like inches or centimeters or French size or in your statement. So
it's interesting if you don't work with
perspective on little things that he might change on your site. Another thing I picked up was that you use natural language processing, which I find fascinating, in a way of getting, I guess, closer to the precision that Verna's advocating. So I'm interested to see when maybe you'll give us a tiny little taste of
yeah. Oh yeah, we'll do some of that. Matter of fact,
I'm wondering, so when you teach your class, do you use the tool, like put it on the screen and say, this is?
Yeah, actually, well, the last year I teach this specific class, design control for medical devices, once a year in the winter quarter. So last winter, I thought, well, let me start using this tool, but I don't want to just dump it on my students yet before I start using it. And I'll see, maybe it's adequate just for me to utilize it. So they would turn in, I'd say, okay, write me a set of requirements for this medical device, and they'd turn it in. And then I would run a report on what they turned in. And it gives me a really clear, score and with a visual, like a yellow, green,
Interesting.
type thing. And so then I would be able to give that back to them and say, okay, here's, your grade for what you turned in. Now go and correct and update this. And what I realized is that, all right, this is really, it's okay, but I really realized how much young engineers, students, and even, a lot of these engineers are master's students, maybe 5-10 years out of school. So engineers at all levels struggle with writing requirements. And I thought, you know what, the whole beauty of the software is that it's teaching you as you're writing, and you can go and immediately get feedback on what's missing. And I thought, I've got to have all my students have this, because in a 10-week quarter, I don't want to be having them turn it in, wait a week. I'd rather have them just go and iterate several times and improve their own statements to the best they can using this tool.
3 quick things. One is, can you hear the banging on my roof?
No.
Good. 2 is, I forgot what number 2 is. And 3 is, I put Michelle on and everyone's like, what did Michelle want to say? And then Michelle raised her hand and I thought, hey, everybody, it's Michelle. Go ahead, Michelle. What do you have to say?
Well, when you put me on, it was right when we were talking about user needs. And so if we look back to that a minute, I have never had a client come to me that had a user need articulated. And so if you don't have a user need articulated, how can you form a design input?
Yes.
What are you writing it off of? Like what you made up in your head that you think that the user wanted?
Yeah.
And
yeah, a lot of times it is. Right.
And when I give my clients a trace matrix, and my particular trace matrix starts a column with user need before the design input, I cannot tell you how much time we spend. They put design outputs in.
Oh, good God.
I mean, it's crazy. They think totally backwards. They think I have a product. Now I'm going to reverse engineer not only my design inputs, but my user need as well.
Yeah.
And then to Verna's point, I used to be co-chair of the NCOSI healthcare working group. And boy, we were spinning there. This is their handbook. This is how to write requirements.
I remember the second question now. I wonder if in your class, you have your students try to do the work without the software and you put it in the software and you grade them and you.
That's what I do, right. That's what I did last quarter, but now I'm going to say, no, everyone's going to have the software.
I wonder though, if it would make the point even more illustrative if you had them do it without the software first.
Well, that's what they do. They have to do it. Well, they do it with, because you have to write it yourself as best as you can. Then you put it into the software basically to score it. So the software doesn't write the requirements for you. It just gives you a feedback on where, like, is your requirement written in a quality manner.
Would it be too disruptive to jump to the part where James dazzles us?
No, let's do it. Let's do it. And because I think everyone here, like I said we could jump around because a lot of people know, because although Michelle was teeing it up for me for my next slide, which is that
okay, let's
the
do
first
this.
stage, the first stage is design requirements. But since we don't have that much time left, let's jump to James's, so people could kind of see what the magic is.
Yeah, I'll just really quickly show you what that does look like. So we integrate wherever you're writing your requirements. Our goal is to be there. So we have direct integrations with Word and Excel, which is where most requirements are started in medical devices from the companies that we've talked to. But more and more people are moving towards requirements management tools, which we think is a great idea. So we've built direct integrations with tools like IBM Doors Next, with Polarian, and by the end of the year, we'll have an integration with JAMA as well for requirements management. I'll show the version here within Word and Excel. The analysis is the same between the different tools. Actually, between different tools, if you do within your team, if you have people using different tools, they're held to the same analysis configuration. So the words that are being highlighted are the same. So there's a default list in QB Scribe that says, these are acceptable imperatives that you can use. So every requirement needs to have one shall statement or must statement that can be customized according to the way that you write requirements. So if it's just shall, you'd only have shall on that list. and it will check to make sure that every requirement statement has one and only one instance of an imperative. So that's from the INCOSE guide. So if I click on that issue here, it'll show me you have shall twice in this requirement. So you get that onto testing and they have to show that this requirement has been met. Well, what do they do if one shall statement has been met and the other isn't? They're going to have to go back and say, okay, you have to redo this whole one to make sure that this requirement has been met. So as a best practice, all of these rules in the INCOSE guide are based on kind of real world experience that these engineers have had in working through documents that don't meet these standards. So something like multiple imperatives can be a huge issue. So that's why this one gets a score of 1 out of 5 with QB Scribe, is it has an issue that really can cause major problems down the road. And then in this particular example, you'll see that another issue is a non-specific temporal word, which is immediately. So it highlights here, this is for a pacemaker, the duration delay shall be terminated immediately. Well, you've now taken something that's supposed to be a functional requirement describing the behavior of a system, and now you've made it into a performance requirement, because now not only is this what needs to happen, but it needs to happen immediately. And worse than that, the person who wrote it has something in mind when they say immediately, and the person who reads it down the road is going to have a completely different understanding. Is that within 1 second? Is that within half a second? It's impossible for anything to happen immediately, so it's impossible to verify. So this is one of about 15 quality score indicators that QB Scribe has. We cover about 30 of the 40 rules from the INCOSE guide overall with those rules. They're not broken out as far as they are in the INCOSE guide. But those would be the issues that impact the quality score. So since this is within Word and Excel or whatever management tool you're using, for this one, we'd say, well, let's just make this a singular requirement. So we'll take that out and put it in a separate one. And then since this really is just describing behavior of the system and not performance, we can actually take it out immediately to make it more clear. And then we also work with, as Verna had mentioned, the easy approach to requirement syntax. Maybe that's a good discussion to have on another day, but that's actually a way to structure your requirements. So you know where the information is supposed to go, but you still have the flexibility to write it however you'd like in terms of putting in the details in the right place. So once I've made changes here, I can actually reanalyze the selected requirement, and it will give me an updated score based on the changes that I've made. So you can work through the whole document this way. You can sort by issue. So if I want to look at each particular issue one at a time, I can go through and sort it that way. Then we do a couple of other checks for the overall consistency of the document, making sure that you're using terms consistently, that you're using one system of measurement, and then the system of units. And then the similarity analysis is there to make sure, once you've gone through this part, that you don't have requirements that are potentially conflicting or redundant. So you're not repeating yourself unnecessarily. So,
and this is just, and I think I was just going to jump in and say, if it's not, because I know in the beginning I was like, really like, wow, like I just have to have a Word document or Excel. I mean, obviously it's great because it's with doors and other software tools for managing requirements. But what I liked is that even a company that's like a startup, once you get to like beyond like 20 or 30 requirements, it starts to become difficult to manage. And so what I thought was great, as long as you've got your requirements numbered, your software like recognizes, oh, this is a requirement because it begins with a number. And then you just basically bolt on QB Scribe so folks can see it. You've got like that little tab in this Word document up in the left-hand corner. And you just basically, whatever requirements document you have, whether it's an Excel file or Word or whatever, it doesn't write the requirements for you. It just, within the document, it gives you this report off to the side that you can then go and interact and improve your requirements and also see, oh, here's a requirement that's repeated, or here's one that looks like it's repeated, but is actually in conflict. So that's what makes it really beautiful. It works with either a kind of a smaller company that doesn't have, extensive software for managing, as well as larger companies like your Abbotts and Medtronics and things like that might have large systems kinds of projects.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions too that came in about how do we work with smaller companies. So basically what I have running on my computer right now is what we call QB Scribe Lite. It's like an individual version of QB Scribe. So our enterprise version that we roll out, if you had a team that was working on multiple documents and multiple people needed access to it, we have an enterprise version that automatically shares the analysis configurations. So you have certain people with the ability to edit which words are being highlighted in which categories and kind of customizing those rules. And then that's automatically pushed to all of the users. So they just have to choose which configuration is appropriate for the project that they're working on. And then everybody on the team is kept on the same page with what's being enforced. So before you get to your review meetings, whether management review or design review that you're going into, the requirements have already reached a certain level of clarity and quality before you get to that point. But if you are using it on your own and you're not trying to fit this in with another process, you can install this on a local computer just by itself. The analysis happens entirely on the local workstation. So, you can just plug it in and get instant feedback on the requirements that you've written.
For those who may watch this as a replay, today is November 6th, 2020. And most of these presentations where I learned something about a piece of software, everyone's thinking, okay, how much does it cost? And this is the part where the presenter usually squirms a bit and doesn't want to commit on the camera. But I'm going to ask it anyhow because you introduced the idea of like a really small shop. So if my requirements are the most basic, I want the cheapest access to this system. Can you share what that is?
Yeah, and we do make exceptions, if it's really a true startup or a consultant that just has an individual license that they're just using on their own. But typically our pricing is around $360 per month for an individual user to access it. It's sold on an annual term. So an enterprise version that we roll out across the company is typically around $20,000 and can go up from there, but that includes your support. What's that?
For what? 20,000?
Per year with floating licenses. So that means you can have it installed on as many computers as you want, and then whoever needs access to it can get to it whenever they need
In
it.
my head says it's as little as 4,000 and as much as say 20,000 a year presently.
Yeah, and then adding more seats beyond that. So
and if I go back to Verna's third slide, which showed the arrows and the ×7 and all the costs, I mean, I'm out of my league here. This isn't what I do, but this sounds like it. It's so funny. These calls, everyone introduces me to a little this or a little that. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, you really should do that. And it's like, if I'm starting, yeah, they all sound good. I have to choose though. I don't have an infinite budget. Where do I talked to Joe Anderson. It's like, oh, I really better focus on quality. I talked to, Michelle, and it's got to be, I talked to you. And it's like, oh, I don't know how to, I guess just making a medical device is an expensive proposition, and you better come with some money first so that you can get the basic tools you need to do it effectively, period. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
An anonymous attendee, and I don't even know how you do that, but an anonymous attendee writes, who should be writing requirements? Who is on the team?
Oh, so that's a great question. So
Thanks, anonymous.
requirements, I could go back to my slides, but basically, maybe I will do that so that we can just click through a little bit, but I want to answer a question specifically.
Yeah.
So,
and it's not on the site yet, but the full webinar that we hosted with X-Talks, it's not live yet, but it will be on their website. They say by early next week. So if you check back there, you just register for it, and then you can see the recording of the kind of whole presentation start to finish.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So basically, this is the waterfall diagram that a lot of you, maybe even all of you, are familiar with. But like I said, some people, when they have more systems, larger scale systems projects, they may be using agile or continuous discovery, where you're going to be iterating through these boxes many times. But you still have to meet these requirements. And the number one is user needs. So when you start writing user needs, you need to determine, I mentioned as I go through this, that you need to determine a use case and do it via a narrative and include physician, whoever your users are, if it's physicians, assistants, patients, include those people in determining your use case via a narrative. That's the easiest way to do it. It's highly recommended kind of throughout a lot of books that I teach from. And then what you want to do is you take that narrative, that story of stepping through a process. You could maybe flow map it. You could do a timeline, basically to kind of help you get an understanding of step by step. And then you're going to translate that use case into user needs, or a set of user needs statements. And again, this should be done not only with the folks that you kind of got that narrative from, but include your clinical person, your engineer, your quality engineer. It's a very detail-oriented step in terms of translating this narrative into user needs. And it's also often iterative, and also, kind of going back to the guidelines, specific wording, definitions, and quantification is involved. So this is one of the first and very big steps that a lot of companies just skip over, because maybe you have an engineer who came up with an idea and they just are kind of all about the technology, rather than, okay, does it really meet what the user needs, require in this development space? once we get into user needs drafted, then it's from that you're supposed to draft your design input. And design input is best done by kind of breaking it down and thinking about it in terms of these different buckets of design requirements, those that are functional, which is what does the device do, performance, in terms of accuracy, reliability, conditions, interface. I'm not going to go into a lot of it here, but those are a good way of thinking about and not missing design requirements. And James and I, like we mentioned, drafted a white paper that even breaks these buckets down further to help you basically as a guideline to think about all the different areas that and categories that you need to think about in terms of drafting appropriate design requirements. And of course, this would be done with your design team. And of course, it's really key because without these done specifically upfront carefully, then, you know, things like your coders, like why does software have a problem? Well, if you don't have really well-written requirements up front, then you don't have the appropriate boundaries for your coders to go and draft code around. And not to be forgotten, since we're in med device, shortly after you do your design inputs, you're supposed to perform your initial risk assessment and then make sure that you identify regulatory requirements and standards that would be a part of your design requirements. And when you do that, a lot of companies will just draft, must meet such and such standard. That's a starting point. But remember, a lot of these requirements and standards don't tell you what your acceptability or your acceptance criteria is. So read into your standards and requirements and understand, is it just telling me a method? Because a lot of them do, and it's up to your engineering team to determine what your acceptance criteria is. So just a big tip there. And then of course we get to design outputs, which again needs to trace, okay, from your user needs all the way through to your outputs. You do the designing and prototyping in the middle here, which I'm not getting into because that's basically kind of a hands-on prototyping thing. But then you need to draft your outputs. So what does that mean? You need to translate clearly, you know, that your design specifications translate to your product specifications. And so product specifications, I think, can also be analyzed using the same types of guidelines of INCOSE, EARS, and of course, applying them even to a software like QV Scribe. You've got basically, you've got drawings and documents. These are all used to procure, fabricate, test, and inspect. Again, focusing on acceptance criteria needs to be in those output documents, and then not to forget risk controls. So basically that is kind of your whole process, and you should be doing your design reviews all along the way at these major points. You don't have to have 5, but you know, most companies have somewhere between 3 to 6 design reviews, and they may have other business reviews along the way as well.
Shannon?
I just didn't want to miss this slide. Now Shannon can talk, but I wanted to
Now
people
she
to have this I want this bold in front of everybody here.
Yeah, so speaking of incomplete, ambiguous, and conflicting requirements, I just had a question as to whether you had any papers that you've come across that specify the number of hours associated with each requirement, including verification, tracing, tracking, etc., for each requirement. Such data would be useful in persuading our customers to really invest time in writing concise and testable and justifiable requirements.
Yeah, definitely. That's the exact type of data that we're trying to collect right now, because that is one of the big problems that is going in, it's not being measured. So, you know, if it were being measured, I think a lot more organizations would be looking for, you know, solutions to automate that or solve this problem, because it is, when you do go back and look at the numbers, you look at things like the Project Management Institute of how much time it takes to go back and redo the work later on if it has been misunderstood. There's a few different ways. We have customers that are collecting this type of data right now. And basically the easiest thing to track is, you know, how much time does it actually take to develop the document? So you can sort of look at a previous project. It took us this many months, you know, even if you're not going hour by hour on it, you can see how long a certain size project takes. Then it gets a little bit more difficult to track, but it is possible. You know, we have things like requests for clarification. There's some organizations that use a formal process. If you don't understand a requirement, this is the path that you go through, so they can actually track on a project that used it. It was reduced by, you know, a double-digit percentage of what it is normally, for example. So that's reduced down the road. Of course, the hardest thing to track is, you know, we avoided issue X because the issue was corrected in the requirement stage, because you never see where you would have gone wrong and what the impact would have been. So all you can do is put these preventative measures in place to make sure that you're not going to be in that situation where all of this rework was needed because of a poor requirement. But right now I don't have a paper I could send you, but we'd certainly be interested in working with you on one, or if anybody else is aware of one, we'd love to see it. So definitely.
Yeah, I think it really goes hand in hand with the research that I'm truly interested in. I offer human factors engineering services, so usability testing, ethnography to verify that the user needs are accurately identified, really meeting with users and gathering that upfront data, as well as justifying use-related requirements. But ultimately, I'm after the data of like, why invest in this sort of activity before writing the requirements? Because it can be expensive, and I think it's a step that most companies skip because it's not required by the FDA.
Yeah, definitely.
Pardon me, we featured you 3 times on the COVID call, 0 times on premium calls. So we've got to get you on the calendar for January or February, please.
Thank you.
Yes, that'd be awesome.
Sorry, James?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, most of the time when customers are doing like a return on investment calculation, you know, they'll do a pilot of the project, of the tool, which we can do anywhere from 2 to 6 months. And during that time, they collect the data on, okay, how much time are we actually saving in the process of writing? And they're typically able to make the ROI calculation just based on that. You know, if, okay, regardless of the improvements that we get way down the line because the requirements are easier to verify and clearly understood and testable, right now, it's going to save us more time because the review meetings are taking less time because they're not actually talking about how do we say this requirement or what's the best way to say this, because they've already reached a certain level of quality before they get there. So that's usually where we focus on with, you know, doing the calculations, is just how much time it actually reduces in the authoring and review stages.
That makes sense. I mean, the most pain points I experience as a human factors engineer is once we get to writing the human factors protocol, which is way at the end of the process for validation, and they have all these ease of use related subjective rating scales, which are not even required or requested by the FDA at this point. And I just asked them, well, what are you going to do if everyone rates it on average a 2 because they didn't like the color of your product? Like, are you really ready to not sell this product? And if so, why does this requirement exist and where did it come from?
Right. Yes, no, it's such a good point, Shannon, because that's another thing that I'm trying to get people to understand more is just 62366. And yeah, okay, you can wait until the end to do your usability study, but you're supposed to do these formative ones that basically inform you of if you have problems that, you know, result in use errors that you could have designed out of your product. So get some kind of formative simulation or something and get a usability human factors expert involved, because it can often be kind of right in front of you, but unless you're really taking the data and realizing, oh, this particular step leads to these 3 things, and this is like our highest, you know, safety issue, and it goes back to 3 steps back of when they, you know, stick the guiding catheter in and, you know, place it or whatever, and that like ends up being what can be a big problem if you don't do that right. And you can either train people appropriately or design it out if it's early enough along. And a lot of people then don't get that, and then it's like, okay, well, we just got to check the box that we've done usability and like move on. It's like,
Exactly.
I just put in Slack in our weekly call channel something that James sent me called 23 must-haves for a comprehensive product requirements document. And James, if you would go ahead and put today's presentation in that same place, and because I already have a few requests for it.
Yeah, for sure. We can do that. So yeah, we'll make that available. Just so you know what that resource is, the 3 categories that Verna talked about a moment ago about the different categories that the FDA mandates for the way to, you know, not miss any requirements, basically. We've just expanded on that to say, you know, these are the different considerations that you need to have. So it actually works. It reads as a 5-step guide because it goes through the steps that Verna just shared, but within that, at the design control, at the level where you're designing the inputs, design inputs, it lists these 23 different categories that you should be considering across that. So that's what that document covers.
Thank you, Shannon. Jeff?
I just had a quick question for both Verna and James. James, you touched on this a little bit when you showed the example of QB Scribe and said, oh, this particular requirement is bad and here's how we're going to change it. I think just in terms of, because the devil is in the details so much, having a few more concrete examples in the presentation and just in general, having it earlier in the communications that you're giving people, these type of presentations, your marketing materials, like, here are 5 classic examples of a bad requirement, and here are the ways to improve them. I really, really like the EARS format. While you were talking, I looked on your website and I was like, oh, that's exactly like crystallizing what I've known intuitively for a long time, but it's a really clear, unambiguous way to format requirements. I really like it.
Storytelling.
Sorry, say again?
Storytelling.
Yes.
Yeah. So just having those examples, concrete examples of this is bad, here's better, here's best, would be a really way to.
Good. That's really good.
Yeah,
That's really
because
helpful.
so much of this language is like, oh, people are doing this incorrectly, and you have to make sure they're clear and unambiguous, and like, but how, like specifically. So that's because
Yes.
I run across so many people thinking they're doing it correctly and they're not, and it just needs to, those examples really, really help. So just a suggestion for you.
Yeah, no, I
I
appreciate
think
that,
you're
Jeff.
so right.
Thank you.
You're so right. Yes. I think I get that feedback all the time from my students. I'm thinking that I'm giving enough examples, and then I realize, oh, you need like 3 to 5, that are just focused on a screen. And then
Exactly.
students and engineers start to get it and go, oh, yes.
And if you don't have room in your presentation for anything more detailed, like the next slide following that is, there are more examples. Here's a white paper with 25 examples or whatever that you can go look at your leisure, but here's the big hitters, at least up front. So a suggestion.
Yes. Thank
And
you.
Jeff's going to
Really
present
great
to you in
suggestion. Thank
December.
you.
I'm sorry, say that again.
You're going to be our guest again in December.
That's correct.
Jeff was guest number
Awesome.
1. Our friends today are guest number 50. So we're ready for another round of Gable.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, friends, where are we going to go next?
I think I just wanted to post the product requirements, which is pretty much the end of my stuff. James kind of did his demo, but basically I just wanted to make sure people are aware of this, because this actually also comes from the design control guidance documents, that product requirements must meet these, be based on user needs. Thank you, Michelle, for reinforcing that for folks. Be organized, and all these things here. So what QB Scribe focuses on are these elements here, clear and concise. It's not going to be able to tell you, you're supposed to write yours based on user needs. But that's why I went through my portion to say, make sure you start there, because if you don't start there, QB Scribe is not going to be able to help you. You'll be able to have a set of requirements like James mentioned earlier, but if they're just the wrong requirements and they're not based on user needs, that's kind of square number 1 that you need to work on.
What we hear time and time again from people that start using the product is, you kind of go into it expecting, okay, I'll be able to just take my thoughts and throw them down, and then it's able to formulate them into well manufactured requirements. And really, what we hear from our customers that start using it is it's causing them to have conversations around the requirements of saying, oh, well, if this is vague, what specifically do I want here? And it allows you to really think through. It's not just a matter of improving the grammar and thinking it through from a how to write perspective, but it's actually making sure that you're including enough detail. And if a word is flagged that maybe you see in that context, you actually think that it's okay, it's still having that conversation around is there a better way to say this, or is this going to be clearly understood by the folks down the line? And those different categories, the user's giving feedback on, this is why this particular one is an issue. That's why we have those different categories, is that the user feedback is specific. We did have one more question at the beginning from someone that was on the webinar yesterday. And basically it was around how you can customize those rules. So right now, those different categories, the ones that are keyword based, some of them are using natural language processing to look for things like passive voice and things like that. But the ones that are keyword based, you have full control over adding and removing which terms you want to use. So you can disable them by removing words from a particular list. You can add your own into them. Where we're going with this in our next set of features that we're going to release, we have no interest in competing with requirements management tools. We think requirements management is kind of boring compared to requirements quality. And there's already a number of solutions out there that do a really great job at that. So where we're going with this next is more advanced things like was in the question that said, if I have a requirement that talks about this, I want to be notified if it doesn't also mention, this standard or this other this other term that should be associated with it. As it is right now, it's just looking for those problems with verification. So, vague language that's difficult to verify or multiple imperatives within the same requirement. Where we see it going is being able to further customize those rules. So getting specific feedback messages for certain words, being able to make those connections, if there's a unit present and you use this phrase, then do this, if not do that, sort of more logical things like that. So I'd love to have a conversation with anybody that's here on the call. We'd be happy to hear about, why you think this would work, or more importantly, why you think it wouldn't work for some problems that you've seen, because that's how we've shaped the product to this point, is getting that feedback on how you see it being used or what would not work about it in your context. So please.
There's also, this is a really, maybe I know we're going over, but
We're not going over, not yet.
Oh, we're not. Okay, good. Lok Jiben, if I'm pronouncing it. So he had, I think, a great question, which is QV Scribe teaching the user in a way that it makes itself obsolete?
Is the person or the software?
The software. I think is what he's asking, which I think is a good question. What I see, and I'll let James answer as well, is that I would say no, because you've always got new engineers that need to learn how to write requirements. But the other thing that QV Scribe does, which is very hard to do without taking a ton of time, is that it checks across your whole set of requirements. So first of all, hopefully QV Scribe would just make your engineers smarter and better at writing requirements and less arguing between engineers, like, oh, I'm using the right word or whatever. And so hopefully maybe it would make itself, well, I would say not obsolete, but basically better, smarter engineers in terms of writing requirements and understanding really what ears is kind of pointing them to. But then it just makes it faster to be able to check across your set of requirements. So I don't see how that is going to go away at all, because it's very hard to, like we talked about before, hold all of these things in your head. So hopefully you would just see engineers getting better at it. But to do it across a set, I can't see. I mean, you can just put more stuff into the software too. I could think of other things that would help.
Yeah.
With traceability, check across user inputs to design specs to then production, and check across the board that way to make sure things aren't in conflict. So
well, I think when we're developing processes like this too, it's easy to forget that there is still a human that's responsible for doing this. So human factors is actually a factor in the processes that you design as well. So if you can alleviate the mental load of somebody trying to keep track of 40 rules when they write something to say, oh yeah, does it do this? Is it concise? Is that language vague? And trying to remember all of these rules, it allows you to just write freely, and then you know that it's going to check and catch anything that you put in that when you slip up. And more importantly, for larger teams, it's keeping them on the same page with, at this stage of development, or for this project that we're working on, or this contractor, subcontractor that we're working with, this is the language that we've agreed to use, and then it keeps everybody unified with the same language across.
It's nice to see the team reunited, Jan and Verna.
yes, and Jan had a question. I think it was a question. But Jan, maybe you want to state it, because I was not sure if you're saying that you ask organizations where your packaging requirements are and they don't have any, or if you were saying, how does QV Scribe address that? Do you want to jump on, Jan, and let us
Well,
know?
it would be both. I rarely see anybody have packaging requirements that make sense. Like, I'll come into maybe a drug eluting something, and they say you can't have any oxygen, and you got to get rid of all the moisture, which is not reasonable unless I want to put it in a glass jar or a steel container.
Right.
Or they say that it's sensitive to light. Well, what wavelength of light causes an issue? I need to have a few more specific information, or something where they're saying what's acceptable for degradation or anything,
Yeah.
so that we can actually work through it. And those are product requirements. I can read them off product
Yes.
requirements, but they're usually so vague you can't figure out what to do.
Yeah, well, what I think it goes back to user requirements, because the user requirements are not only the physician and the patient if they're a user, but you need to also consider the other stakeholders, regulatory affairs, meeting certain standards, but also manufacturing and packaging. So those should be incorporated into, like, okay, we want to ship over to this country, and they're no longer accepting ETO or something. I mean, you need to put these things in early so that you understand, that your designers understand what they need to design around. And packaging is one thing that you'll see is in that white sheet that James and I developed, because again, after working with a packaging group, if you've had packaging and labeling, you understand that these are often things that people don't put money and resources on, especially not appropriate resources. They just go, oh, we'll just have our engineer do packaging, you know, and then you have a bad package and your product gets recalled because of packaging. And people go, oh yeah, but it's not that hard or whatever. Well, I'm sorry, but there's people that have packaging degrees and they understand all the tests and how packaging and labeling can completely bring your product down. Indeed, similar to product requirements, packaging and labeling is often one of the major reasons for recall.
Right. And with the way with terminally sterilized medical devices, the package is part of the product.
Yes.
So, and so many people forget that. It's
Yeah.
very frustrating because they'll come to me and say, oh, put this in a package. And I'm going, well, if it was an inch shorter, you could save $200 a shipment. You know, it gets a little weird sometimes, especially if you got temperature controls going on and trying to get them to understand what excursions are.
Look at everybody. Look at all of my smart friends. And before we let
it takes a village. It takes a village to get a medical device out.
Everyone check out Jan's new background in her new home.
Oh,
We're not seeing her on the moon today.
No, this is not my new home. I'm still in my old one. I can't get my new one fixed.
What? I thought you already moved.
No, we go up there once a month for a week or so usually and try and get things done.
Do you want to tell the people at home about the COVIDs?
Well, you have to be careful with COVID. I evidently developed pneumonia 40 days afterwards and had a heart attack. So I am, you know, be careful with this COVID. It's just weird. I had no symptoms, no coughing, no fever or anything until my shoulder hurt so bad. I went to the hospital and they said, you're having a heart attack. And I'm going, what? You're positive for COVID. What? And it was very strange. So be careful, guys. It's
I didn't realize
nasty.
That when you went to the hospital for shoulder pain, you were having a heart attack and at that point did not know that you had COVID?
Right, because I had it, I tested positive 40 some days before and thought I was clear because I had no symptoms. But it was evidently festering in my lungs too.
Wow.
So you never tested positive?
No, she
I
did
tested
early.
positive in August, beginning of August.
Okay. And then you tested negative.
No, I never, the health department said don't bother to test negative because it sticks around for a while and you'll get a false positive. So I hadn't done it, but they tested me when I went into the hospital and I was positive. So I got put in a COVID ward. And I think that was a false negative, false positive because my husband went and got tested the next day and he was negative. And I got tested again when I got out of the hospital 2 days later and I was negative then. But I definitely had COVID pneumonia.
Well, Michael Sterling shouts out to you. Sorry to hear that, Jan. So, and I think all of us say that is like, that's like shocking and disturbing. And I'm glad you look like a picture of health right now, considering what you went through. Goodness.
Well, the heart surgery was actually easier than shoulder and back surgery. So it's very weird. Thank goodness for medical devices. And it was one I packaged too. So
you put up a slide where we can send our donations to Jan's medical fund.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully so far, all the bills that have come through, I've got $50 I have to pay. So that's nice.
Okay, good.
So far.
That's the most cost-effective heart attack I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Well, we pay
your
for
heart attacks.
insurance.
That's the one I want.
What?
I said, where do you get your heart attacks? That's the one I want.
Oh, no.
I mean,
no one wants it.
I want the cheap one like you.
Yeah. Well, I've got a damaged heart, so I have to go and do rehab and see if we can get it to come back.
Yeah.
But it wasn't too bad because I got in time.
Yeah. Good.
Verna, take us to lighter places. Take us to lighter things.
Okay, so listen, your life can be so much better if you do, and I think we're probably just preaching to the choir here on this call, right? Because we all know, please, people, startups, bigger companies, start with your design, user inputs first, user requirements. That's going to be, make your life a lot easier. And then just realize that the FDA, as well as European Union, understand that requirements are key, they're foundational, and there's guidelines that you can utilize, such as in COSI and EARS. So if you want to start, I would say, you can, if you're like not sure if you want to use the software yet, just start with the white paper that James and I drafted together. That's going to be helpful for anybody if you're just using spreadsheets and manually doing it and you're in the beginning. Wonderful. And the EARS document is also an easy read, and that will help you in terms of, without using software, but just understand what the EARS guidelines are, because there at least you have something that is a systematic approach to understanding if you have clear and concise guidelines. And the FDA actually states that you need to have some kind of system. And if it's just, throw it up on the wall, and if it's spaghetti, see if it sticks, that's, I don't think that's going to last too much longer in the industry.
Hey, James, I don't know what your policies are or what your freedoms are, but can you hook up my friends with a free trial or something?
Yeah, if you get in touch, where we typically would do like a free analysis report. So if that's something, if you have maybe a spec that you're able to share, I can return a free PDF report. Looks like this
Show
one.
you how many mistakes you've made and how much better it would be using our software. That's a great idea.
Well, it's actually an important part of what the tool does, actually, because this allows you to see the quality of the requirement that you've written without having to even expose it to somebody else. So even while you're working on it on your own, you can sort through it and see these issues that are present in it and be able to work through them. So as you're going through the document, yeah, we can do that. But definitely, for anybody that's on the call, get in touch. There's a path forward that we can show you how this could work for your groups. I'd be happy to connect with you.
I like the pretty colors.
Yeah, so do I. It's easy. It's really a pleasant user interface to basically scroll through, numerous requirements and then know where you need to focus on first.
Really nice job, guys. Ed asks, does the software work for both CE marking and FDA?
I guess I would say yes, because basically, I think what he's asking is EU
the
and
design requirements relevant for...
Yes, right. It'd be both, because these are standards guidelines that are across industries, worldwide recognized. So it's not just like a US based, focus or whatever. It's just good common language and consistency. And it's important to start, I think that's a really good point, though, because a lot of times what you see is if you don't have the language appropriate and agreed upon and concise within English, sometimes you're going and translating things. I didn't even get into that to like Chinese, if you've got, suppliers over there, or German. And so you need to start with at least something that's clear and concise in your English language, because then you're sending stuff over that's going to get translated into another language. And that process is a whole nother process that can bring up lack of clarity or misinterpretation.
James, I'll assume your software is available in one tongue only.
That is correct. Yeah.
Is that on the development path, or we're going to stick with English?
Yeah, it is. It's not on the immediate development path. Actually, for the keyword-based part of the analysis, like the UI is always in English, but we do have some customers that have created their own configuration in a different language where you can replace the words that are in there to do, imperatives checks and looking for vague language. So in that way, it can be fine-tuned, but it's only supported in English at this time.
How many folks do you have at the company?
We are 20 strong right now.
And is yours, not to diminish the importance of the one, is yours a one product company?
We are a 2-product company. This is actually our second product. This is a more mature product right now. So we have another product called QV Trace, which is for verifying model-based designs. So it can look for unexpected behavior in any cyber-physical system. So where you have software that's controlling hardware. If you have a situation where there's this perfect storm where deep within the recesses of all of your model-based design, you have some instance where the engine is going to be turned off without when it shouldn't be, for example, or a device is going to go into a different mode when you're not expecting that. That analysis can take the requirements.
Is that product as robust as this one?
I'd say it's more robust, but less mature. So that one's still more in development. That actually turned us on to the problem of poor requirements, because you're querying your models against the requirements. And so what we found was, even when trying to use this advanced analysis in real world projects, many of the things that we were considering design errors would actually be traced back to be requirement errors more than half of the time. It was actually...
I imagine that Jeff Gable would be a good partner for you on this.
Yeah, we'd love to connect with Jeff on that then. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
That brings us to an hour and a half, which is just about tying the record for the longest presentation. But I'll remind you that the longer they are means the more engaged people typically are. And I'll just say that as a storyteller who does not understand requirements, you made this very digestible and understandable. I understand the value proposition, why it's important. And Verna, you have lucky students. You're a great teacher.
Oh, thank you. I love it. You know, it's kind of like when you love something,
Yeah.
it becomes easy. And
I-
they help me learn, you know, they help me, they ask questions that maybe after, you know, 10, 20 years just seem so obvious. And then all of a sudden, you know, I'll get a question, I'll go, oh, well, that's a good question. You know, it makes me have to go back and learn more.
Let's talk later because I don't know what your bandwidth is. I know it's not, you haven't got a lot of extra room and time, but I imagine that what you're doing for students, which I'm thinking like college and credits and
Yeah.
such, would be very valuable for those of us who are mature in our careers. And maybe there's some way that I can help get the
Yeah.
word out that, hey, everybody, Verna's teaching, come on and learn with us. So
Yeah, it's fun. It's great. I mean, from so many levels. I've told a lot of other friends of mine that are around my age range. I go, well, listen, if you are feeling like, oh, I've been doing this career thing forever. I mean, I just kind of fell into this teaching thing. But I said, you want to show up as someone over 60 and then just talk about what you know in med device. I say, students are just like, Professor Rodriguez, how about this? Da, da, da. Can you tell me about this? I mean, you just feel like a rock star. So if you're feeling like, oh God, my career's at the end, it's kind of boring, everyone knows what I know, just go teach. And you'll see there's so many young people that are inspiring, that ask great questions. They want to help change the world. I mean, it just is going to reinvigorate what you're doing in terms of med device, and that there's hope in the world and there's people that want to make the world a better place.
I hope you guys are around next week, and definitely Jan, you're around next week. We're going to be talking about shipping medical devices in a smarter way.
Yes. Awesome.
I just brought up Verna's website for the other hat that she wears, which is the consulting business. So mantymed.com. If you
All right.
want to
Yes.
get in
Yes.
touch with Verna
Thanks,
with that
James.
as well.
And the week
Yes.
after that, we're going to be talking about EQMS systems. So these are all tied together nicely. Then some guy is going to be talking about marketing, but it's the day after Thanksgiving, and he figures everyone's going to be too full here. And so I think that week. Anyhow, this was a joy. Thank you both.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank
Thanks a
you,
lot,
Joe.
Joe.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
See you on-
everybody.
Okay.
Pleasure. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.